So much for a very thought-provoking presentation. Both presentations giving us an awful lot to think about. Now, one question for Rick before I open to the floor, because I've been asked specifically to ask him to address this, is how we think about the nuts and bolts of measuring that police are effective and the balance between quantitative and qualitative targets and how that can actually be used productively.
Yeah, thanks. So is this good? Is that working? So, I mean, this is this big debate about the use of targets and the use of performance.
Try this one.
Thank you. Is that, yeah, that's working. Okay. Thanks very much. So how do we measure success? And what we've traditionally done is we have identified lots of different key performance indicators which will tell us whether or not a public service is achieving the things that those responsible for that service want it to achieve. And I think we have to distinguish between different things. One thing is targets, and I think there's plenty of evidence that crude numerical targets have had their day. They don't actually generally improve performance. They may get numbers up, but they may not deal with the underlying problems. But even if you get rid of targets formally and say there are no targets, normally what happens is you're left with still with loads and loads of key performance indicators, which essentially sort of informally become targets because you call it an indicator, but you then tell people it's really, really important that we reach this indicator, and then you sort of think, well, what's the difference between a target and an indicator? And the important thing here is to remember that indicators are indicators, and that performance is something we can't see. I mean, you know, we can't sort of touch or feel it. Performance is this thing which we are trying to find an indication of where it's at. And so whatever indicators we use are going to be imperfect approximations. And so what I would say about this is that, yes, we need to measure performance. Yes, we need to use numbers to measure performance, but we need to make sure that the numbers that we're using are holistic. We need to make sure we're using both kind of aggregate quantitative statistics, but also do qualitative kind of deep dives to really understand what's going on in greater depth. And we need to remember that a lot of the things we're trying to achieve are not in the gift of particular public services. And so this is where we come back to outcomes, and we come back to, if you're going to have indicators which cut across different services so that they encourage people to work together to really deal with them. So, I mean, it sounds like a rather obvious thing to say, I think, but, you know, we're hopefully, I think, moving away from this focus on crude numerical targets towards something which is much more nuanced. Because I think the key thing about performance is you want a rich picture, not a simplistic picture. And you know, that's I think where we need to go.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to open up, as I promised. We're going to run a little bit late to 3:15 for this session to make sure that comments can come to the floor. So please, question away. Yes, lady over here.
I'll sing a song. My name's Kula Yasuma, and I am, I'm the Commissioner for Children and Young People. It's not a young blackguard that's going to come round your way to commit a crime. It's a middle-aged woman who'll be up. But anyway, moving on. Welcome the conversation about young people and what ails them. Just want to say so many things, but I'll try and keep it short. At the risk of being a broken record, and I think over the last 5 to 10 years, I have been a broken record. Let's start with today's news this morning about confidence. Fantastic news about confidence, but those confidence rates were measured for people over the age of 16. We don't actually have, either here or across the water that I have seen, robust information about the confidence levels of our children and young people under the age of 16 in our police service. I want to pull up the question that Barbara asked earlier, which is, one of the things I'm going to take away from this conference is this idea that partnerships are organic and have emotions and are living beings, because that really resonates for me. What we've heard today is we cannot sort policing by just looking at policing. What policing is as a consequence of social issues throughout society, poverty being a key one. Outcomes-based approach that our government is taking is absolutely the way to go, and I urge patience as we develop that further. But the one thing I do ask is, what's going to happen next? We've all had conversations, we've all heard things that I absolutely agree with. What next? And my plea is to continue to work together better, not to, the other thing that Will said is for the police not to jump, just to work in partnership, to hold back a little bit, and let other people lead who are better placed to do that. And to engage all agencies, whether you're police or not, to engage better and to listen more to your children, your young people and their families. And that two-way conversation is so very important. And just to add to the oversight accountability piece, that'll be one of the jobs that I will continue to try to do to make sure it happens.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, no, thank you very much for your comment, unless you'd like to respond.
Just that thing about young people, etc. Sorry, that issue about young people, etc. In the work that we did, this survey of 1,200 young people and 800 mothers, you're talking about in those communities, over between 75 and 84% of all crime and sectarian behaviour that they reported themselves, that they were involved in, was based upon an emotional or mental health problem. So you're saying about what do we do next? Well,
We know what to do.
yeah.
We know it's how we do it. We know what we
Yeah.
do. It's not an issue.
Yeah, but the point is,
We know what we got to do.
yeah.
We've just got to do it.
But it's there's not there maybe is not enough discourse around those types of findings and the prediction. Okay, well then, okay.
I think there is. I think we all agree with you. So I think we all agree with you. It's now the getting on with it, and I am optimistic that the outcomes-based accountability. We have a Children's Services Cooperation Act and a new strategy for children and young people is going. We'll. You know, I welcome the statistics. The more evidence we have, the better. But I can see the Chief Medical Officer, I can see the Chief Constable, I can see the Chair of the Public Health Agency. That's just people within my eyesight. There's loads of really great people behind me who
And
all
I'm going to let them join in shortly.
No, why? Why bother?
So you
Who
can round
all
up,
know
okay?
what needs to be done. We just need to do it.
I mean, I think maybe what has been really helpful about some of the discussion today is around focusing on vulnerability, because actually there we don't have to have the binary that you're saying has been problematic in certain respects around identity and looking at it through that prism in terms of the problems, and everybody in the room recognizing that vulnerability is coming in many shapes and often is in private space that we haven't looked at before. So I think that's vital. Other comments and questions? The gentleman over there, and then I'll go to the lady.
It's a question for Peter. Councillor Jim Montgomery from Antrim and Newton Abbey Council. At the moment, we're about to give out several £1 million under the Peace 4 initiatives to different programmes. From what you were saying earlier, is that money better focused on welfare issues rather than so-called tribal issues?
Yeah, I think very much. I think that's before doing this research over that 10-year period, I probably would have thought that dealing with those conflict-related or historical issues would have been important. What this really reaffirmed, and as the data was collected more and more over time, what was more affirmed was the relationship between adjustment issues, mental health issues, and behaving in antisocial ways or behaving through crime. That became more and more obvious as we did this work across time. It seems to me that, of course, it seems that this is already, from the previous comments, this has already been picked up. That work at the table I showed you there, obviously this is all very quick, there's more if you read the report, but clearly, and I've seen this in other pieces of work, the contact hypothesis has virtually negligible effects upon young people and their attitudes towards the other side. And it's where you actually, so if I think about where are there good relationships between the two communities, if there are two communities, right? It's in places like the coffee shops of Stranmillis or the coffee shops Botanic Avenue, where they're at university together, where they're not in resource competition with each other, where they're living in areas, and like my children are pretty much sectarian, gender, sexuality blind, sexuality blind, okay? Because they've grown up in a comfortable environment and all of that. So you know, the point about it is well, the answer to your question, sorry, in shorthand is yes, we should be dealing with these crises of citizenship, and that crisis of citizenship should be seen not as a citizenship model of inclusion, it should be seen as a health problem. It should be seen as a family crisis problem. Because I'm sure most police, whenever I talk to, when I think about doing the research in Northern Ireland, everybody says, I know that. So when I talk to police officers about this, they go, yeah, but that's what I end up doing. I'm a social service worker. I'm going around picking up the mess that's lying somewhere else in society that's not being picked up elsewhere. My wife's a special needs teacher. So for example, the work, Paul Nolan and I did that work about with others about the flag protest. And my wife's a special needs teacher. And the first night that the rioting started in East Belfast, she went, I won't have many pupils in tomorrow. Well, that's my 3F class. She's a special needs teacher. She knows these kids are all kids who are living at very high levels of risk. And these were the kids who were out there on the street engaging in that way. Now, I know one of those kids because he played football or rugby with my son. Like this wee lad couldn't tell you anything about identity. But somebody was able to manipulate him because of his needs, because of his special needs. So the answer to your question is yes, it's a mini welfare state type engagement I think we need.
Okay. And I think there was a lady over here who, yes, had her hand up. Thank you.
Thank you. Vilma Patterson, Probation Board.
Can I ask you to stand, because then everybody can see who you are. Thank
Right.
you.
Probation work collaboratively with the police, with the voluntary community sector, and delivering a number of innovative projects that work to reduce reoffending. We know these work. The outcomes show they work, and we've heard a lot about what more can be done on an outcome-based approach. My question is, how can we, or what more can be done to engage the public in an informed and intelligent debate and discussion around these, and engage the media in an informed, intelligent debate to build confidence in the public of other outcomes and alternatives that actually work?
Maybe I could ask both speakers just to very concisely respond, and then maybe the Chief Constable might like to make a comment on that as well.
There's some, if you mean by alternatives, sort of non-custodial alternatives and those kind of things, which we know the evidence shows are much more effective than sending people to prison at reducing reoffending, then I think we can't really do very much about the media. I mean, you can talk to the media, but of course, when you have a free press, you can't sort of dictate what they report or what they will say, and they'll just say what they want to say, and that's right. I guess what you can do is try to engage with them. But also, there's some really interesting work by a group called the Frameworks Institute, who are based in the US, which is about the language that we use and the way we talk about crime and punishment. And they've produced some work based in work that they've done in England with the public, talking to thousands of people about and testing out different messages. And they found some fairly consistent findings about how you build public support for alternatives to custody. You don't talk about economics, for example. So you don't say, it's cheaper if we don't deal with it in prison, it's cheaper to do it in the community. Because when the public are thinking about crime and punishment, they don't really think about costs and benefits like that. Because it's a moral thing. It's like, well, people are being punished because they did something bad, so I want to see something done about it. And it turned out the most effective message was the message around the criminal justice system is like a fast moving river, and once you're in it, you can't get out of it. And the more and more, this was the one message that when they talked to people about it, it really resonated with the public. So there's something about the language that we use in describing alternatives to custody and the way we do that. I mean, that sounds a little bit manipulative. Let's all talk about something in a particular way, and the public eventually will understand. But if you're advocating for alternatives to custody, there's no point in using language and narratives which people just don't listen to. And unfortunately, most of the messages which are currently used about alternatives to custody don't affect the public's view. It doesn't shift support for custodial sentences.
Thanks, Rick.
It's achieving what we might call post-conflict journalism, because most of our journalism is still caught in the conflict. And very much it's caught in that because it's populist. And we look at some of our media institutions here, they've become more populist. And they have done so with very easy narratives about certain bogeymen, etc. in our society. I think we look at it a slightly different way. We actually have a society in which quite a lot of people do engage. So there's, for example, the churches, there are a lot of groups, you and I and others would know in this room, who are effectively running soup kitchens. There are people who are raising money for, people who are less fortunate than many people in this room. There's also people here from former, conflict-related prisoner backgrounds. There's people here from social justice backgrounds. We actually do have that. Why does the media not write on that? And I think that's the problem. And it's I don't know how you get them to do that. But I remember one time, the time of the riots in Clune Place, there was a women's group, Short Stand Ballymacarrot. So it was, actually when I went in to interview them, I went over to the women who were speaking Irish and said, I'm really sorry, do you know where the women are from the other side? And they went, we are the woman from the other side. Because they were doing Linda Irvine, they were doing Irish with Linda Irvine. But one of the things that they had done is just before the Clune riots, they had produced a little booklet which was about life and living in that community. So it started off as a let's look at the past, and then it actually became more about how do you, some of them had children at Asperger's or whatever else, okay? So they wrote this little book which was about basically living there. It got beyond the narratives of we're two tribes. It talked about being a woman in a working class deprived community. During the Clune riots, they brought out that booklet. They persisted with it. They brought the booklet out. Page 6 column, half an inch, 2-inch column in the Community Belfast Telegraph. Why was that not on the front page of the Belfast Telegraph? Why was that not something that was indicative of an alternative way that people were engaging with the crisis around them and that they were showing leadership? Why did that end up in the paper that you get through your door that you use to make paper sticks to light the fire? That tells you that, I can't answer the question, but it tells you the depth of the problem.
Chief Constable, we're going to come back to you in just one second. I've been asked, and without putting anybody on the spot, if the Chief Medical Officer or other medical representatives would like to make any comment on the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael McBride, Chief Medical Officer. A very interesting discussion. Apologies I wasn't here earlier. I think it's important that we don't confuse underlying cause with symptom, make the wrong diagnosis and then prescribe the wrong treatment. Much of the work that you're describing there, Peter, is very interesting and resonates with much that the research in health is telling us. That really the conditions that you're describing are the biology of poverty. The symptoms of that are manifest either in terms of engaging in antisocial behaviour and crime, or they're represented, as Shirlow was saying earlier, with young people having high levels of use of alcohol, of drugs, and underlying mental health problems, and we're seeing that. And it's based on the work and extensive research of Aaron Tarnowski, which actually demonstrates that it's actually young people's inability to have a sense of coherence, to make sense out of the world that they're living in. The fact that the world that they're living in, particularly in early years, is not predictable, is not explicit, and they can't make sense of it. And what happens is high levels of anxiety, which is manifest then in high levels of alternative behaviours. I think it would be wrong to say it's a health problem or it's a social problem. It's a much deeper seated problem, which, as Kula has said, we can only but address at the government level, and that's why the current programme for government, with its cross-cutting approach and its outcome-based approach on our public health framework, Making Life Better, is the vehicle. And certainly working with our colleagues in local government through community planning, I think we have a significant opportunity and an obligation to tackle the root causes which are causing pressures both on health, on the policing service, but also huge damage in our communities and to our young people.
Thank you. George, if I could bring back to you, I mean, I think what was really clear about what Rick was talking about is this danger, and I think you alluded to it last night, around public expectations, which are very traditional and broad. 75% of people want uniformed officers. But when asked, 7% think that the police should be focusing on vulnerability and protecting people from harm. When we're all aware, having had these discussions, the resources being spent on vulnerable persons is huge. So how do we take steps to start educating the public around the demand you're facing, around the changing nature of crime, and then trying to work their expectations to actually coalesce a little bit closer together?
Well, I think this is where we are really reliant on each other across agencies, and accountability bodies like the policing board need, in my respectful view, to be more than an accountability body, but actually explaining to the public, and that public education piece that Rick referred to, because if the police try to explain this away, it looks very defensive. Right. And there's something about, you know, the policing board are there to monitor and ensure that I deliver an effective and efficient police service. Until you become a victim of, you know, cybercrime, fraud online or something, or we're still blackmail, child sexual exploitation and grooming and all of that, until that affects you or your family, generally, excuse the stereotyping, but people in our communities, right across our communities in all sorts of social economic strata, will still think of visibility of policing, all the research that Rick was able to show us, you know, so they want to see the high visibility jackets and all the rest of it, until harm befalls them and they actually become a victim, and they realize that they have become a victim in a non-public hidden place, probably online, and probably much more sinister than the old-fashioned pickpocket or having your handbag stolen or your car broken into. So I suppose, just thinking it through, we do need to educate the public in a non-patronizing way, and I think other people need to be, it's not so much advocating for policing, looking for some sort of a sympathy vote, but it's this notion of educating the public where the real harm potentially lies and what they can do to prevent that, and how police resources are best used to protect them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I've got 3 or 4 more minutes, so a couple of more inputs. Gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is Bob Collins. I'm a member of the Policing Authority of Ireland, but that's not the context in which I want to make a comment. I have to confess to having spent 30 years in the media, in broadcasting in the neighbouring jurisdiction. And I think there's a risk in regarding the media as a virulent virus for which no known vaccine has been identified. Because I think that won't resolve any of the issues. And there are serious issues in relation to which the media, which for a variety of reasons are now much more part of the entertainment industry than they are part of either a public service or of providers of news and information. But they're not here. There isn't anybody from the media here to be engaged with, to hear the remarkable richness of last night and today, which richness will take...
I think we have had some media representation.
Very good. Well, there were cameras here last night, but it's the sustained engagement and trying to attract that sustained engagement. I think that is a challenge for everybody who's engaged in this particular discussion, perhaps more than most others, because there is no doubt, and it has bedeviled coverage of Northern Ireland for a very long time, that unrealistic expectations make success appear like failure. And this has been certainly a difficulty in my time in RT that we constantly sought to address. It's also an issue that confronts anybody who's dealing with how the work of a police service is evaluated. Because if it doesn't meet the expectations that have been identified, then it's perceived as failing. And part of the challenge is to use the media, which are widely consumed by people, so that they will have a more effective understanding. Not easy, but it needs to be done on a sustained and prolonged basis.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? I'm hoping to see a woman's hand go up because I'm trying to make sure we have some gender balance. You're all exhausted. Okay. Okay, well, at that point, we're still on my new time. So let me thank both Rick and Peter very much for their really interesting contributions. So thank you both.